When we look back across the vast timeline of human existence, further than the rise of kingdoms, further than the first carved symbols, further even than the earliest villages, we find the first spiritual questions being asked on African soil. Africa was not just the birthplace of humankind, it was also the birthplace of meaning. In the deep prehistory of the continent, long before any written record, early humans opened their eyes to a world alive with power, danger, beauty, and mystery. They lived among mountains that shook with thunder, skies that burst open with furious rains, rivers that flooded without warning, and vast plains where predators hunted in silence. For these early communities, survival was a daily negotiation with forces far greater than themselves. At some point in this long journey, instinct became imagination, and imagination became belief. Humans began to sense that behind every force of nature existed a presence, something unseen. Something powerful, something that responded to human behavior. This was not yet religion in the modern sense, it was a primal awareness, a feeling that the world was inhabited by spirits long before names or stories existed. Lightning was not just a flash of energy, it was an expression of will. Rain was not just water, it was a gift or a warning. The wind that swept across the plains carried messages. The soil beneath their feet breathed life and death. As these early Africans gathered around fires, hunted game, raised children, and buried their dead, they began forming the earliest ideas of divinity. Each terrifying storm and each life-giving season became a lesson. The sky, stretching endlessly above them, became the first temple. The mountain peaks, unreachable and commanding, seemed like the throne of an invisible power. Rivers, which provided both life and destruction, gained the reverence of something sacred. The world was not random, it moved with intent. And if the world had intent, then something must be behind that intent. Archaeological evidence offers a window into this spiritual awakening. Deep within caves in southern Africa, ancient paintings show figures dancing, animals glowing with spiritual significance, and scenes that blend human and mystical forms. These were not simple decorations. They were attempts to understand and influence the unseen. Burials from tens of thousands of years ago contain shells, pigments, tools, and beads, objects placed with the dead as if they would be needed in another realm. Even then, humans believed that life did not end with death and that the world was far larger than what the eyes could see. From these early experiences, the first gods began to take shape. They were born not from scripture but from survival. When a drought brought hunger, people sought to understand who controlled the rain. When thunder rolled across the sky with deafening power, they imagined a mighty being commanding the heavens. When a river flooded unexpectedly, sweeping away huts and livestock, they saw it not as chance but as the expression of a spirit demanding respect. These gods did not appear all at once, they formed slowly, as humans experienced the world's patterns, its rhythms, and its unpredictability. Over thousands of generations, these interpretations solidified into belief systems. The gods of Africa's earliest people were intimately tied to the landscape, spirits of storms, guardians of forests, masters of animals, and keepers of rivers. They represented the forces that dictated whether a community thrived or suffered. Their personalities grew out of the natural elements they embodied, sometimes generous and nurturing, sometimes violent and unforgiving. To worship these gods was not merely an act of devotion, it was a strategy for survival in a world where every day carried the possibility of danger. As human communities grew, shared these beliefs, and passed them down through stories told by firelight, the once formless spirits of nature became the first divine figures. They became the ancestors of all later African deities, gods who would evolve into complex spiritual pantheons, worshipped through elaborate rituals, dances, songs, and offerings. But at their origin, they were simply expressions of awe. They were the result of humanity's earliest attempt to make sense of a world filled with both wonder and fear. Thus, the first African gods emerged not as characters invented out of imagination, but as reflections of humanity's deepest need to understand its place in a vast and unpredictable universe. These gods formed the foundation of one of the oldest spiritual traditions on Earth, one that still influences millions of people today and continues to echo through the heartbeat of the African continent. As human consciousness expanded and early communities began to name the forces around them, the first African gods emerged as embodiments of the most essential elements of existence. These deities were not abstract concepts, they were living presences woven into the daily rhythm of nature. Among them, the sky gods were the earliest and most universal. For ancient Africans, the sky was the greatest mystery, vast, unreachable, and forever watching over the world. It was from the sky that rain fell, sunlight poured, seasons changed, and lightning roared. People believed that an immense power lived above them, a force that governed the cycles of life. Over time, this presence became the supreme being in many African traditions, the creator who set the world in motion and maintained its balance. Whether called Olajune among the Yoruba, Chukwu among the Igbo, or Nyam among the Lozi, this deity was seen as distant and supreme, too great to be approached directly, yet unquestionably the source of all creation. But while the supreme being ruled from afar, other gods drew closer to the daily struggles of life, taking on roles shaped by the needs of the people. Among the most feared and revered were the gods of thunder and storm. Lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the earth, and winds strong enough to destroy homes were not random events, they were expressions of a god's anger, judgment, or power. In these terrifying moments, people felt the presence of a divine force that could punish wrongdoers or protect the righteous. The intense personality of these storm gods made them guardians of moral order, feared not only for their destructive abilities but also respected as enforcers of justice. In West Africa, the thunder deity Shango became one of the most iconic, representing not just raw power but leadership, discipline, and the consequences of human actions. The storms were his voice, roaring across the world to remind people of the unseen forces that governed their lives. While the sky and storms captured the imagination through power, the earth itself became the symbol of constant nourishment. Across the continent, early African societies depended on the soil to grow crops, feed animals, and sustain their communities. Over time, the earth was personified as a mother, a divine feminine force who nurtured life and held the power of birth and renewal. These earth deities were the protectors of agriculture, fertility, and family, and they shaped a gentle but profound part of ancient spirituality. When seeds sprouted and rains blessed the fields, it was seen as the approval of the Earth Mother. When crops failed, it was taken as a warning or a call for ritual repair. Worshipping these deities meant honoring the rhythms of planting, harvesting, and the cycles of life that sustained the entire community. Yet no force was more vital, or more temperamental, than water. Rivers, lakes, and springs became sacred long before cities or kingdoms existed. Water was life, but water also carried unpredictability, floods that destroyed villages, droughts that brought suffering, and currents that could sweep away the unprepared. Early Africans believed that powerful spirits lived within these waters, beings capable of healing, blessing, and punishing. These water spirits were often seen as both beautiful and dangerous, capable of granting fertility, health, and wealth while also demanding respect and ritual. Over time, some of these spirits evolved into recognizable deities such as Oshun, the river goddess of sweetness and fertility, or the mysterious Mamiwata, a spirit associated with beauty, healing, and the deep unknown of watery depths. For ancient communities, water deities were not distant myths, they were active presences that shaped daily life, from fishing and farming to healing and divination. Each of these deities, sky, storm, earth, and water, formed the foundation of early African cosmology. They reflected humanity's deepest experiences with the environment, protection, fear, nourishment, and survival. More importantly, they formed a spiritual map of the world, one that allowed people to understand the mysterious forces around them. The gods became teachers, guardians, and guides, shaping the earliest moral codes, rituals, and cultural practices. As communities passed down stories of these deities from generation to generation, their identities grew, their powers expanded, and their influence deepened. They became the heart of a spiritual tradition that would evolve through centuries but never lose the essence of its ancient origin. A profound respect for the living forces of the natural world. Part 2 closes where Part 3 will soon begin, with humans learning not just who the gods were, but why they worshipped them, feared them, and relied on them for survival in an unpredictable world. In the world of early African societies, the line between life and death was thin, fragile, and constantly shifting. Each day was shaped by forces beyond human control, a sudden storm that could destroy crops, a long drought that starved entire villages, an unexpected illness that swept through families, or a wild animal that claimed a life without warning. In this environment of uncertainty, people turned to their gods not merely out of devotion but out of necessity. Worship was a relationship of survival, a way to negotiate with the powers that ruled the natural world. Fear was often the beginning of belief. When thunder rolled like the footsteps of a giant across the sky, people felt the presence of a being far greater than themselves. Lightning that tore open trees was seen as the strike of a supernatural hand. Illness, which arrived without explanation, suggested hidden forces acting in the shadows. Faced with such unknowns, humans sought explanations, and those explanations became the gods. They believed that if these forces could be understood, or at least respected, they could be influenced. Worship became a strategy to restore balance when nature turned hostile. Yet fear alone could not sustain a spiritual system. Alongside it arose hope, a powerful and equally human emotion. The rain that revived dying crops felt like a blessing. The birth of a healthy child was seen as the touch of a benevolent spirit. A successful hunt, a safe journey home, or a recovery from sickness, all of these were interpreted as moments of divine favor. People believed the gods were not only capable of destruction but also capable of kindness, guidance, and protection. This duality made the gods deeply human in their personalities, mirroring the unpredictable nature of the world itself. It also allowed worshippers to form intimate relationships with these deities, offering prayers, music, dance, and rituals in exchange for stability in their fragile lives. Morality, too, became intertwined with the worship of these gods. In many traditions, deities, especially those associated with storms or justice, were believed to reward honest living and punish wrongdoing. A liar might invite disaster, a thief might anger the spirits of the land, and a person who disrespected elders or violated community laws might find themselves afflicted by unexplained misfortune. This belief that the gods enforced ethical behavior transformed religion into a social glue, binding communities together under shared values and shared fears. Worship was not just spiritual, it was also moral. It taught people how to live with one another, how to respect nature, and how to maintain harmony within the group. Central to this spiritual logic was the belief in ancestors, those who had died but remained connected to the living. Ancestors were seen as intermediaries, messengers who could carry human requests to the higher gods. People felt a deep obligation to honor their forebears through rituals, offerings, and remembrance. If the ancestors were pleased, they would protect their descendants from misfortune, guide them through dreams, and speak on their behalf to the gods. But if neglected, they could withdraw their protection or allow chaos to enter the household. The presence of ancestors added a profoundly personal dimension to worship. It was not just about nature and cosmic forces but about family, lineage, and identity. Communal life also shaped the evolution of worship. Rituals were rarely practiced alone. Entire villages gathered for ceremonies filled with drumming, chanting, dance, and symbolic offerings. These gatherings reinforced unity and collective purpose. The beat of the drum imitated the heartbeat of the earth. The rhythmic dance symbolized the flow of cosmic energy. The chants were ancient words believed to open pathways between the human and spiritual realms. In these shared experiences, people felt connected not only to the gods but to each other, forming bonds that helped them face the uncertainties of existence. Worship became a celebration, a negotiation, and a safeguard all at once. In essence, the gods were worshipped because they answered the deepest human needs. They brought structure to chaos, meaning to suffering, and hope to darkness. They offered explanations when none existed and protection when danger was constant. Through the beliefs and rituals surrounding them, early Africans created a spiritual framework that helped their communities survive in a world of unpredictability. The gods were not distant myths, they were living presences intertwined with every aspect of life. They were protectors, judges, healers, and companions. And in their worship, humans found a way to connect with the mysteries that surrounded them, forging a relationship that would shape the spiritual traditions of Africa for thousands of years to come. As the centuries unfolded and human societies spread across the vast landscape of Africa, the earliest gods began to change, diversify, and take on new forms. Migration played a defining role in this transformation. Families and clans moved in search of fertile land, safer environments, or better hunting grounds, carrying with them the stories and rituals of their ancestral deities. But as they entered new territories, forests thick with spirits, deserts shaped by scorching winds, river valleys alive with water beings, the gods evolved to reflect each unique environment. The same sky deity who once symbolized distant creation in one region could, in another, become a more personal figure who controlled storms or guided travelers. The landscape reshaped the divine, and the divine, in turn, became a map of the land. Trade routes further accelerated this evolution. Along paths where goods, languages, and ideas flowed freely, gods traveled as well. A river spirit from one culture could merge with a fertility goddess from another, their stories intertwining until they formed a single, more complex deity. In some regions, deities crossed borders and were adopted by neighboring tribes, gaining new attributes and symbols. In others, foreign gods were adapted to local traditions, acquiring new rituals and personalities. This process was not seen as a contradiction but as an expansion of the spiritual world. African religions were not rigid systems, they were living, breathing traditions that welcomed change and embraced diversity. As a result, the African pantheon became a rich tapestry of interconnected myths, each thread representing centuries of cultural exchange. The environment continued to shape divine identities in profound ways. In the deserts of the north and east, where survival depended on the mercy of the sun and the rare blessing of water, gods associated with heat, sand, and oasis springs took precedence. These deities embodied endurance, resilience, and the delicate balance between life and death in harsh climates. Meanwhile, in the dense rainforests of Central Africa, spirits of trees, animals, and rivers flourished. These gods were seen as guardians of the natural world, watching over hunters, protecting sacred groves, and guiding shamans in their visions. Farther south, where grasslands stretched to the horizon and the sky dominated every view, sky gods retained their power, evolving into complex figures who governed cattle, rain, and the fertility of the land. Each region crafted its pantheon according to its ecological reality, creating a divine geography that mirrored the physical one. As communities grew more sophisticated, the spiritual roles within society became more defined. Some individuals were believed to possess the ability to speak with spirits, enter trances, or interpret signs from the gods. These people, diviners, healers, shamans, and priests, became the custodians of evolving belief systems. They preserved ancient practices but also adapted them to new circumstances. Their rituals ensured continuity even as the details shifted. Through their visions and teachings, the gods gained new stories, new ceremonies, and new pathways of communication with the living. The spiritual authority of these figures helped shape the moral and cultural identity of each community, anchoring the gods firmly within the social fabric. Despite all the diversity, a remarkable truth remained: underlying these differences was a shared foundation. Across the continent, the idea of a supreme creator persisted, accompanied by nature spirits, ancestors, and deities tied to the earth, sky, and waters. Even when the names, symbols, and stories differed, the spiritual logic was the same. This unity beneath diversity is what makes African traditional religions extraordinary: thousands of belief systems, yet all rooted in the same ancient worldview. Over time, as kingdoms rose and fell, cities flourished, and new cultural groups emerged, the gods adapted again, blending old wisdom with new interpretations. The early gods of nature transformed into intricate pantheons with complex hierarchies, mythologies, and sacred responsibilities, reflecting the growing complexity of human society. Through this long journey, the first gods of Africa never disappeared. They simply changed shape, moving with the people, merging with new environments, and growing richer with each generation's imagination. Their evolution tells a story not only of religion but of human resilience, creativity, and connection to the land. And even today, echoes of these ancient deities can be found across the continent and beyond, carried in rituals, names, songs, and the enduring belief that the natural world is alive with spiritual presence. Today, as modern Africa continues to evolve politically, economically, and culturally, the ancient spiritual worldview that once shaped the earliest human societies has not disappeared. Instead, it has transformed, adapted, and woven itself into the fabric of contemporary life in ways that remain surprisingly strong. The belief in a supreme creator, in ancestral guidance, in the spiritual essence of nature, and in the interconnectedness of all life continues to influence the decisions, values, rituals, and identity of millions of people across the continent. Far from being relics of a distant past, Africa's traditional religious ideas remain living systems of meaning, dynamic, practical, and deeply personal. Many African families continue to pour libations to honor their ancestors before major events, not as a primitive ritual, but as a reminder that life is part of a continuum, that identity spans generations, and that the living are never alone. Farmers still consult diviners to understand the forces affecting their land, blending agricultural science with long-standing respect for invisible energies that shape fortune and misfortune. Even in fast-growing megacities, where smartphones, highways, and skyscrapers dominate the landscape, traditional healers and spiritual leaders remain trusted advisors in matters of health, conflict, and destiny. The legacy of Africa's earliest spiritual worldview also lives on through syncretism, the blending of old and new religious systems. In West Africa, Yoruba cosmology merges with Christianity or Islam, creating layered spiritual identities. In Central and Southern Africa, ideas about ancestors and protective spirits coexist with modern schooling and global cultural influences. Across the African diaspora, from Brazil and Haiti to Cuba and the United States, descendants of enslaved Africans have preserved and reinterpreted ancient rituals through religions such as Candomblé, Vodou, Santeria, and Hoodoo. These traditions carry echoes of the first African worldviews: reverence for ancestors, respect for natural forces, rhythmic ceremonies, spirit possession, and the belief that the spiritual and physical realms interact fluidly. This diaspora survival demonstrates the resilience of Africa's earliest cosmologies and their power to give identity and hope, even under oppression, displacement, and cultural destruction. Beyond rituals, Africa's ancient worldview continues to shape moral values. Many communities still emphasize communal responsibility over individualism, reflecting the belief that people are spiritually interconnected. The concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, which has become a symbol of African humanistic philosophy, is rooted in the old understanding that the life force flows between individuals, ancestors, and the wider community. Environmental ethics inspired by ancestral traditions also re-emerge today as Africa faces ecological challenges. Sacred forests, rivers believed to host spirits, and taboos protecting animals were early forms of conservation long before modern environmental science. Many governments now recognize the cultural and ecological importance of these sacred natural sites, which preserve biodiversity and strengthen community identity. Modern African artists, filmmakers, writers, and musicians increasingly draw inspiration from the continent's ancient spirituality to tell stories of identity, resistance, and empowerment. From Afrofuturist films to traditional drumming ceremonies performed on global stages, Africa's earliest spiritual languages are being reclaimed as sources of pride rather than misunderstood as superstition. In academic circles, anthropologists, geneticists, and historians, African and international, continue uncovering new evidence connecting early human evolution with the development of spiritual consciousness on the continent. Their findings reinforce what many African communities have believed for centuries: humanity began in Africa, and so did the earliest expressions of wonder, reverence for life, and deep questions about existence. Ultimately, the origins of African traditional religion are not confined to the past. They live in collective memory, in rituals practiced today, in diaspora survival, in ecological wisdom, and in ongoing cultural revival. The ancient worldview that emerged among the first humans continues to offer powerful lessons about harmony, community, respect for nature, and the meaning of life. As Africa moves forward into the future, these teachings serve as both an anchor and a compass, reminding the continent of where it came from and guiding it toward what it may become. The story of Africa's spiritual origins is therefore not only a historical narrative but also a living heritage, one that continues to enrich global culture and expand humanity's understanding of itself.